Welcome to this Wordify YouTube video, where today we're going to have a look at and review the new game from Osprey Games, which is a mass battle system, fantasy mass battle system, and it's called Oathmark Battles of the Lost Age. So this is by Joseph McCullough. You may well remember him from doing Frostgrave, of which there was a new edition just come out, but also his self-published Rangers of Shadowdeep, which is a sort of fantasy narrative skirmish game. So this is a bit of a difference for him, moving into the mass battlefield. He hasn't really done that before. His other things have been very much at the sort of heroic and team sort of level, a party of adventurers, so to speak. This game is a bit different. It's very much more in the sort of realm of, say, Warhammer Fantasy Battle, Kings of War, those sort of mass battle games that that are available. It contains 192 pages. 192 pages, that is a hefty book. It's hard-backed, classic sort of Osprey production actually, some nice art on the front, and it's supported by a range of miniatures actually from North Star Miniatures. So you can use whatever miniatures you want, but the miniatures within are from North Star, and already they have 2 supplements planned, even though this book only came out in about February, March this year. There's a Facebook page obviously to support it. I've not seen too much yet, but of course we've had coronavirus, so that's been probably a bit of a dampener on people's ability to get games in. But there's certainly plenty of stuff coming along with it, so I think it's going to be well supported. And Osprey do tend to do that with the successful games. Of course, Frostgrave had many supplements. There are 74 pages of rules, which is quite a lot, but that does include a lot of art in there as well. It uses a D10 system rather than a D6 system. D10 is relatively easy to get, again perhaps reflecting Joseph McCullough's sort of background really in a D&D sort of origins. I quite like the idea of D10s, I must admit. I think it gives you a nice range, not quite as big a range as say Frostgrave, which I didn't like with the D20 system, where there was too big a range. But D10s I think is a nice happy medium. The rules follow the same standard sort of things: activations, combat, shooting, and then there's a narrative element in that as well for sort of how you build your armies for campaigns and some scenarios as well. And we'll look through all of those in a moment when we do the flip through of the book. There are armies in there. There's goblin stroke orcs, so they're combined. It's not separate sort of identities. Humans, elves and dwarves. So not the standard wide range of different sort of ethnicities, races, or that you might expect. Instead, they're much more sort of shortened. I don't know if that's a purposeful decision, or was it because the miniatures available at that time were from those races. Also, you don't have to have your army built on racial grounds, so you can have goblins in your human army, and I think that's quite a nice touch. A very old school approach, but it's quite nice. I think you don't see that a lot in most other games. Usually things are, you're all orcs or you're all dwarves. I suspect they don't synergize quite as well if you do that, but it's an option for you, which does perhaps make it a bit more acceptable for new players, or if you've got a mixture of different miniatures and you just want to sort of use what you've got. So, Oathmark Battles of the Lost Age. Well, Oathmark I think is what we're going to call it. Lovely hardback book, nice art on the front. Pretty standard style for Osprey, with this sort of off-white look to the pages. Some really nice photographs of the miniatures in use. The usual index, of course. Sorry, contents page. This is one of the better pieces of art. I said I didn't really like some of them, but this is one of the better ones. There's some not quite so good. So yeah, some really basic stuff, the usual, what is wargaming, if you're a complete novice, which you might be, I guess, coming to this game. If you picked up these games because of Osprey, it has a very wide coverage, of course. Tells you about base size, tells you about miniatures, Tells you about terrain, how to measure, dice to use. As like I said before, it's a D10 system. And then we get on to sort of playing a game. You do a standard profile for a human in this case. An example of a small army. The different stats that they use. So this is probably one of the most important ones, CD here, combat dice. The number of dice that you get per model. But it is a bit strange, and I'll explain that when we get to the combat section. How many wounds and special rules and things like that as well. So this is an example of how a unit would be. Ranks are the key here. 5 men in the front and the depth of the ranks going down. So this back rank here, only 2, won't count for anything really. It's only the full ranks that really count when it comes to fighting. And that's really important. You remove models obviously from the back rank, you don't take them from the other ones until the rank has been completely removed. So it's all about ranks. It's a rank and flank game, it's all about ranks. And this is showing you how you determine the flanks as well. So what does annoy me a bit, or quite a lot actually, is that you can see that it's determined by the number of ranks, the size of your flank. So if you lose 3 more models, you lose that back partial rank, of course, then you start reducing the size of the next rank. And I believe it's only complete ranks that count, so therefore your angle then will get much narrower. So again, a flank charge on that unit now will be much more difficult. Yes, getting a front or rear charge will be easier though, but I don't know, I just find that really odd. Yeah, I don't like that. Maybe because I played Kings of War too long, maybe that's what it is. Another not too bad piece of art, this one. I quite like the elves, to be honest, a very old school style. Some nice line drawings throughout as well. Line of sight, fairly standard stuff. You can see that there's a leader model, that's important in every unit, and you can obviously model that accordingly. You get, are we on to activations yet? Where did we do activations? I don't think we've done it. Here we are, activations. So, activations. You get 2 activations each round for each unit. So you can move, shoot, but you can only ever shoot once. You can maneuver, so change formation or something, but again, only once. If you move twice, you actually only move 1.5 times your speed, not double it. I quite like that actually, although it is a bit sort of twee as well. If you get lots of different units that move different amounts, then you've got to sort of do a very quick piece of maths in your head every time, which just seems a bit unnecessary, to be honest. But I can see why they've done it, because you don't want people zooming around the table. To activate a unit though, it isn't just a case of I pick this one, it does something. You need to roll 2 dice and beat the activation number. So let's go back to that. Here's an activation number here. So the activation number for these humans is 5. Okay, so you've got 50, well, slightly better, 50-50 chance of activating them. If you don't activate them fully, what happens is you only get one simple action then, so a move or a shoot, for instance. So it has a little bit of similarity with games like Dragon Rampant there, where you sort of aren't guaranteed that you're getting everything you want from your units, but it's not quite as strict as that, where you know the turn ends and it flips over to the other player. I don't know about that. I'm a bit in 2 minds about that, if I'm honest. Just the maneuvers you can do, again, sort of like there's really only half a page of text on all of these pages, you know, and there's some huge art as well. So although I said the 74 pages of rules, it's not really 74 pages of rules, probably more like 40 pages of rules actually. How to do combat. Okay, so combat is based on a number of combat dice. So if you remember that human we saw before, you had 1 combat dice per model. So yeah, so basically you're going to end up with 5 dice if you've got a full front rank. So everyone's going to get 5 dice. Where it matters is that you then get a whole bunch of modifiers here. So you can see it gives you the situation and a modifier to the target number. So let's go back to our human unit again. So they've got 1 combat dice and their fight value, or the figure's skill, is 2, and they'll be modified by the defense as well, which is the D. So you get some modifiers here for, so if you're attacking the flank or the rear, you get -1. If you're attacking units disordered, you're defending the rear arc. For every 4 rank, -1 for each 4 rank after the first. Okay, so the more ranks you've got, the more useful. So an example would be, you've got, well, let's take an example I've thought of before. So you've got dwarves who've got a fight value of 2. You've got goblins who've got a defense value of 9. So your target number to roll on your d10 is actually a 7. The defense minus the dwarves combat number, then modified by these modifiers. Okay, so you might take it down to a 6 or a 5 if you've got a rear charge or you've got more ranks and so on. So here you go, -1. So say they were 3 ranks deep, the dwarves, that target number would, instead of being a 7, would now be a 5. You don't count the front rank, but you're -1 and another -1, down to 6, down to 5. Both units fight. The amount of hits you do has a scaling effect on the damage that's then done as well, which we'll come on to. This is another piece of art. I don't really like this one. So you rolled your combat dice, you determined your hits. Okay, the number of, so equal to or exceeds the target number. Okay, so 1 equal or exceeds the target number +5. So say you need a target number of 2 and you rolled a 9, you'd get even more. And then even potentially even more if it goes over 10, which obviously you'd need modifiers to get to anyway. And that's the number of hits that you've scored on the unit. You then apply the hits to remove casualties and then take a morale test based on that, which we'll look at later on. To take a morale test, you again have a target number. If the test is failed, you become disordered, which makes it harder for you to activate. And if it's failed again, once you're disordered, then you become broke, and then you can be sort of a degree of cascading panic onto other units as well. Shooting is basically the same, it's almost identically the same. So there's, and it gives you an example of that, because it is a little bit granular actually. Most units seem to fight on a 2 and defend on a 9 or a 10. So dwarves have slightly better defense than humans or goblins, as I gave, but they fight the same. But then you might have specialist warriors, so King's Guard or something like that, who might have a fight of 3. There's a lot, well, not when you get used to it, I'm sure, but to start with, there's a lot of having to think about this. So I have a fight of this, I take the person's defense, then I minus my fight from it, then I have to look at these other modifiers here. Ugh. Bit annoying, to be honest. I'm sure when you get used to it, and with the aid of a quick crib chart, it's very, very simple. Most things will have a defense of 9 or 10, it seems, and most things have got a fight of 2 or 3. So actually, it's quite simple. But it isn't. You do have to think. There's a small element of having to think about it there. Not masses, but it's a pause in the game to think out what the target number is. And target numbers are, you know, they're things from D&D and from Frostgrave, and so they're very thematic for the type of games that Joseph McCullough writes. Shooting, like I said, is basically the same. Cover obviously has an effect there. Morale, okay, so morale, you get a -1 for each casualty. Unit is disordered, talked about disordered a moment ago, affects that as well. If you have lots of ranks again, remember I said that ranks are important. If you have lots of ranks again, you get bonuses to this, okay? And it's easier to survive a morale attack from shooting than it is from combat, which is a nice touch actually. You don't get that in a lot of games. I quite like that. Because shooting is easier to weather in some ways. Although you could take the other argument, say, of medieval battling, in that archery could actually stop a battle from even happening if you completely disrupted the opponent's army before they even got to hand. Right, so there we go. So that is basically the sort of core rules. And there's a whole bunch of advanced rules about using characters, how they benefit people in combat. They tend to join units, seems to be the way that they work. They activate certain abilities as well. They can die. Spellcasters, there's quite a lot of different spells as well, and different items. There's a few So strange events that can happen, optional rules. I like these things. I really like these narrative things. They're very nice touches. And then we talk here about sort of how to build an army. So armies are based on kingdoms. You determine a number of regions. You pick what the regions are that you want to have, and then that unlocks different types of units. So here we have the dwarf terrain list. Their first region has to be a dwarf city. Second region can be a forge or a mountain pass. Let's show you this a little bit closer. Second region can be a forge or a mountain pass or a lumberyard. Third region can be a hermitage, snow-capped mountains, tarns or moors. So they get different types and they allow different unlocks. So you can see that you're allowed to have some of these other units only if you have these ones here, and I quite like that. I think that's quite nice, a little bit fluffy. In a campaign, of course, you attack and you take someone's moors, for instance. You remove that from their territory. They're no longer able to get the Barghest models that they would have had before. And there's a different one for humans, elves, orcs and goblins, and then unaligned. So if you wanted to have a mixture of different sort of species, actually, not races, they're species, you could do that. How to build an army, again, tells you what you can do and the number of points that you're aiming to play at. It seems like maybe 1,000 points is about right for a smaller game. And then you've got all the lists themselves. So the dwarf lists, starting with the heroes. And you can see, let's just have a look at those heroes actually for a second. We talked about fighting. So these fight on 4s and a defense of 11. Prince fighting on a 3 and defense of 11. So there's not a huge difference there compared to, say, a standard infantry unit. But they come with some other bits and pieces as well, of course, of their heroic status. Usual stuff: dwarf spearmen, dwarf archers, dwarf soldiers, dwarf warriors, dwarf line breakers, dwarf militia. Nothing particularly novel about it. Miners, that's all pretty standard, really. Catapults is the heavy artillery. A couple of interesting sort of different creatures. So sort of fantastical beasts, which you wouldn't necessarily always think of aligned with dwarves in a traditional sort of Tolkien-esque or Warhammer-esque style. Humans, very non-specific humans. I mean, the art seems to suggest a pseudo-medieval sort of 13th century style, but that's just the style of the miniatures. There's, like I said before, there's no fluffiness at all to sort of really give any hold on it. If I was to play with humans, I suspect I'd probably try and align it with Rangers of Shadowdeep, actually, the realm there, just because there's a bit of fluff to go with it. I mean, it's nice that Snow White sent her dwarves out to deal with this incursion from these goblins and Vikings, but yeah. Again, the usual sort of stuff, very similar really to the dwarf ones, but obviously some slight differences. Through that, ogres, well, it says Bugain, is it Bugain? So some things I've not really heard of before as different sorts of creatures. I think they're trying to take a slightly different angle for their miniatures range, of course. Giant, nice. Everyone loves a giant. Oddly, on a very strange base, 100 by 50 millimeters. It's an odd base. 100 wide by 50 deep. That's a very strange base. Like a unit, really. Elves. Elves are quite Gary Chalk style. The miniatures range that supports it and the art in it. But they're standard stuff. Elf rangers. They're sort of, I guess they're high elves if you want to take the Warhammer style of it. Again, yeah. Again, giant spider. Wouldn't really think of that in an elf list. Interesting. Orkin Goblins. So again, they come hand in hand, Orkin Goblins. The style of the orcs is quite different from a lot of the stuff that's on the market currently. But yeah, they're nice. Wolves, classic, of course. Catapults, wolf riders, trolls, knucker. I do love a knucker. It's a big snake, isn't it? Gargoyles. So yeah, fairly formulaic sort of stuff. So here we are. So gargoyles actually. So these are different things, extra creatures you can add. Dragons, which do seem incredibly powerful. So they have a fight of 8. 8. Okay. and a defense of 14. Wow, they are strong. Okay, they are 700 points, mind you. So yeah, I think interesting to see what the dragons do. And that's it. So there's a few extra creatures there. I'm sure there's going to be loads more. There's certainly undead coming, and sort of rules for heroic units, sort of regiments of renown, I guess. Campaign system. This bit I quite like. So again, it tells you the scenarios, and it tells you how to sort of play extended games. There are only 5 scenarios in here. And I'd argue that actually only 3 are very accessible, in that you don't need specific things for them. So one is bridge the river. Okay, well, so terrain-wise, I need a river then, or something to mark a river. That's a bit unusual to put that in as a basic scenario. Likewise, the Oathmarks. The Oathmarks are intended to have you sort of create these Oathmarks. That's the name of the game, of course, as you can see in the background of these arts. But then you have to. It's not something you can take off the shelf. And then one of the games, Wind and Rain, has a big effect on sort of how you move and shoot in the game. So, despite there only being 5, I'd say only 3 of them are really easily accessible, and probably only 2, to be honest, which is Chance Engagement and Pitched Battle, which is a bit odd. And the others, yes, they are narrative, I guess you'd feel, but they're narrative in a slightly peculiar way. It's like, I can't imagine I'm going to ever play Bridge the River more than once or twice in my life, because you're going to end up fighting at the bridge, and you're going to be, oh, that was okay, but we'll try something different next time. There's a whole bit about Oathmarks themselves, though, which is quite nice, and how they boost things around them. And that's clearly meant to be an ongoing theme, and I'm sure there'll be extra rules at some point for how to. These are just a scenario overviews. No maps. No maps. Why? Why are there no maps? Simple to do. Wind and Rain, like I said, Wind and Rain, how it affects things. Like minus in the target number. That's like next level gaming, isn't it? It's not like pick up and play, is it? You need to know a bit already and be confident in how to play before you start meddling with the base rules. A whole bunch of special abilities, loads of them. A whole bunch of spells, loads of spells. Look at all those. Some are specific to races. Obviously, this probably stems to some extent from Frostgrave. Not that I know that game particularly well. Different target numbers, casting numbers, they call it here, but it's target number. I really like that. I really like there being so many spells. I think that's quite nice. Magic items, not masses, but there's a few. Yeah, and it's just the reference bits and templates and stuff at the end. So, there we go. So, coming back to talking about the book, what do I like about it? Well, there are some expansions planned already. I think that's really good to know that expansions are coming, so that you can be sort of confident that it's going to be well supported, as a lot of Osprey games are, and I think they're putting a lot of effort into this one. There's a large range of spells available. I think it's nice that you don't have to have the races aligned to play in each army. The army building, I think, is a really nice touch when you build based on how many mountains you have, what things you can have based on that. It's a little bit complicated, I think. It took me a couple of times to read through it, but I do like that. It's not a major thing, it's quite minor really, but it's quite nice. And you're playing a campaign and you're trying to capture other people's lands. I think that could be, okay, I'm definitely going to target this because that will deny them the ability to recruit this particular unit. I think that's quite thematically good, actually. And that builds into that campaign element, which I think is a strength of the game, definitely. There are some downsides. There's virtually zero fluff in here. There's nothing. There's no world or anything like that. And I can see in one way why you want to be free-form, allow people to develop their own stuff, but a lot of us do like the worlds that get created. I mean, it's strange when the writer comes from a background of like narrative stuff with Frostgrave and ranges of Shadow Deep, but there's really strong narrative in there, and the fluff is, there's not masses, but it builds and builds and builds. But this has got virtually zero, and I think that's a real shame, because I'm sure that there is stuff in Joseph McCullough's mind that he would have wanted to have included, but it just doesn't pass muster at all, which is strange. Another downside to me personally is that the basing for the miniatures, everyone is, all infantry anyway, are based on 25mm square bases. That's not a standard size for most people's armies. 20 by 20 is much more common for human-sized miniatures, or round bases even, but of course this is rank and flank. So there's going to be an element of rebasing for most people, I think, when they transfer their armies over. So I think that's potentially a bit of a downside. No one likes rebasing, ever. Model removal during combat or shooting affects facings, sort of the angle of facings. I find that really annoying. So to get a flank charge, suddenly if you remove some models, actually your angle of your flank now has been narrowed. I hate that. I hate it. Because it's only on 4 ranks it's based on as well. I really dislike that. That would annoy me on a regular basis. Even it might not come up, it annoys me that it's even there. One of the other big sort of downsides for me as well, visually, is that you've got this great big book, hardback book, fantastic. It's not expensive either. The art inside is pretty average. And I think that's a real shame. There's some fantastic fantasy artists out there, yet the artists that they've chosen for these Oathmark book and that also are on the packaging of the miniatures is pretty average. It doesn't really inspire me much. Coloration's pretty weak. I think that's a real shame. The miniatures, however, in there are pretty old school in style. They're very sort of 1990s style miniatures, but the art of them is really good. They've been painted nicely, and the photographs of the miniatures themselves is top-notch. I think that's really good, and I much prefer seeing that than I do seeing the actual professional art, unfortunately. So overall, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10 actually. Now the caveat is, of course, I haven't played this yet, I haven't been able to yet, but there's enough things in there that make me feel a bit like, which is a shame. I doubt very much it's going to beat, say, Kings of War, the simplicity of Kings of War that makes the game very quick, the looking up of tables and so on. I think is going to be something that's going to happen far more frequently in this game than maybe in some other games as well, like Kings of War, for instance. And I think that'd be a bit frustrating, but I'm very keen to give it a try, and I want to see how it works on the table. So thank you very much. I hope you found this review helpful. Please like, comment and subscribe. Check out the Way at Fire Facebook page, and check out our other videos and listen out for the Way at Fire podcast. So thanks very much everyone. Take care.